Ambrosia, and I want to thank you all for coming. And I wanted to tell you why I decided to do the talk. I thought, I'm new to Los Angeles, and at first I thought about putting an ad in the newspaper, and then I realized that really didn't tell you very much about me as a teacher. And then I thought about just starting classes and having people come in to audit. And I thought that really wasn't a good idea either, because my feeling is when you go to audit classes, the only thing you're really seeing is the problems that the teacher is dealing with that day. But you don't get really an overview of the teacher. So then I thought a little further, and I thought if I was looking for a teacher, I would want to know something about what their philosophy of theater was, and about what they knew and their understanding of it. So that's why I decided to do this talk. I'm going to be using notes because, like anyone in the theater, once I begin to go, I have a tendency to rattle. And I think the material is important, and I want to make sure that I say everything that I want you to hear. And afterwards, if you'd like to stay, there'll be a question and answer period. The man whom you came to hear me talk about tonight, Stanislavski, he was a bit of an idealist. And he said, come in, please. He said an actor had to train all of his life, and that he had to cultivate his mind, train his talents, develop his characters, and he may never despair and relinquish this purpose to love his art with all his strength and love it unselfishly. He was very idealistic. Before I talk about his work tonight, I want to start a little bit about training. Number one, why does an actor train? I think ideally we train so that we become more versatile, and we can play lots of characters, and we can play many, many different styles of acting with many different approaches. That's ideal. I think pragmatically, we train to protect ourselves. I think that's really why we train. We train to protect ourselves when we work with directors who either can't help us or won't help us. I don't know, there seems to be a thing in this country, it's always been bewildering to me, that we train our directors how to set up camera shots and how to do picturization, but very few directors are trained with how to work with actors, and those are the people they work with all the time. Occasionally a director has that training, but even then sometimes they won't work with you because they feel that's your job. They're not there to help you do that. They're just there to tell you what they want. And then every once in a while, you get a director who is what I call an actor's director, who makes you go way down deep in your gut and do things you never dreamed it was possible to do. But I think that's a handful in our field. So we train so that we have a process, and so that we can solve acting problems on our own. Because the reality is, if we can't solve them, we lose the job, and it's an ugly thing. But you know, there are thousands of actors out there who will come in and do it. I think that actors somehow they go through periods where they get afraid of being trained because they feel they're going to lose their talent. Do you ever think about that? If I let somebody tamper with me, then I'll lose it. Occasionally, you hear of people who have never really been trained, and they get work in our field. But those people usually don't last in this field, because natural talent isn't really going to take you through sustaining yourself with the work of purpose. Training teaches you to use your talent in new and in different ways. That's what training teaches you. And nobody can take your talent away from you. Occasionally, you get mixed up with a teacher who's wacko, and you may go off on a tangent. The same as you can get mixed up with a director who doesn't make you look very good. Although I believe the director's first job should be to make the actors look as good as they possibly can. But they can't take your talent. That's your gift. No one can take that. We're in a field where we're typecast a lot. So someone says, well, I'm typecast. I'm only going to play one kind of character, right? And I'm only going to do one sort of thing. So what good is it going to do me to be trained? What's going to happen is you're going to have more depth, I think, and more variety in even playing that one role that you're going to play. What draws us to acting? Why are we drawn to acting? I think that...
It wasn't a question?
What?
It was a thought, right?
Yeah, it was a thought. It is a rhetorical. I think that we have, if you are drawn to acting, a very special awareness. And that even when you're very young, you realize that you have a very special understanding. A very special understanding of what you see. And it's very different from the people who are around you and what they perceive. And sometimes, I think you notice very early on that you feel a little separated from your closest friends, sometimes from your brothers and sisters, sometimes from your lovers, sometimes even from your parents, because you begin to perceive things in a different way. And what we're doing, we're seeing things in a much more sensitive way than most people see them. People who are drawn to performance have an inner sensitivity, and they have a perception of the universe that I think is very special. We have a light, and it's a very special light, and it's sensitive, and we begin to protect it because we know that it can be very easily hurt and that we're very vulnerable. And we go to such lengths to protect that light that we begin to put up grates, almost like a big iron gate, because we want to protect it. When you come to train, the gates have to come down, because what you're really after is that the light should be seen. And we have to learn to lose fear in order that the gates can come down. I think that's what unites all of us sitting here tonight. That's what all of us have in common. A class, for me, is not a place to come in, please. Is not a place to come so you can impress others. That's not what a class is about. I don't think a class is a place to come where you can be as creative as you can. I don't think that's what a class is for either. I think that a class is to create an atmosphere in which everybody in it, including the teacher, can be creative. It is to create the atmosphere. not the magic of any teacher. That's not what a class is. A class is for you to learn to be responsible for the quality and the intensity of your work and what you will contribute to this field later on. That is what I think a classroom is. Your intuitions are perfect. Everybody sitting here has perfect intuition. And I think that what a teacher does is a teacher helps you to learn to trust and believe in using that intuition. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating the kind of actor who says, I just did it because I felt like doing it. My intuition told me to do it. That to me is self-indulgent garbage, particularly if you went against what the writer wrote, just because you felt like doing it, you're going to express yourself. That for me is very selfish. What I think a teacher can help you to do is to learn how to feed your intuition true and correct information. And if you get true and correct information going in there, then you will begin to trust your intuition. I think one of the reasons that we don't trust it, again, goes back to the fact that we're also terribly frightened. The intuitive side of your brain, your imaginative, your creative side, that's the side that always got you in trouble. Right? Yeah, when you do something, even when you're in school, you sort of do something crazy because your intuition told you this, and it gets you in trouble. So that what happens, it's like the intuition goes to sleep. And when it tries to rear its lovely head, that side of your brain says, don't do that. That's what got you in trouble the last time. You want to sort of conform. You want to do the cliche thing here. Then you're safe. So what you're learning to do in a classroom is to reawaken all that intuitive side. And you have to be taught to use every creative idea that comes to you without fear of failure. A short while after I arrived here in LA, a man died whom I just loved with every fiber of my being because he taught me to have renewed pride in my work. And I felt that it was, he had an incredible understanding of an actor's psyche. And his name was William Ball. And he was the founder and the director of the American Conservatory Theater. And I want to share with you some of the things that he used to say about failure, because I never heard anyone say them so well and yet so strongly. All acting is a process of trial and error, and we only know what works when we find out what doesn't work, and that involves failure. He said, we encourage failure. We say fail big. We say fail splashy, messy, big. You throw yourself into it all over the place. And when you get up and you say, oh my God, I failed, the teacher or the director gives you more love and more encouragement. And they say, good, good, you wonderfully failed, beautifully failed. He says we have to overload that actor with more love and encouragement because as artists, we know at the moment of failure, the light goes on. The light goes on right after you fail. And then he said, the most beautiful word in the English language is ah. He said, you fail big, you fail gloriously, and don't be afraid to approach that doorway, because that's where the knowledge and the freedom is. And if you allow yourself to go recklessly into failure, the terrible fear that we all have will recede. Why do we go into acting, and what do we do? I think, this is just my opinion, I'm a very opinionated lady. I think we go into acting because in our childhood, we just didn't get enough approbation. We just didn't get enough of people saying we were good. We weren't praised enough. I think that's a lot of times what it is. Maybe they praised others, but we didn't get enough. I don't think one actor was praised sufficiently as a child. I think if you were praised sufficiently, you grow up and you go to work for IBM. You don't become an actor. Praise to us is our food. We starve ourselves for that. And it's a sad thing, but true, that about 75% of wonderfully talented actors can't find work. And yet they hang on to their food. The irony of the situation is that we are in the business of praising and creating awe for others. That's what we do. We who I feel never got enough. We who want it. We praise and we create awe for others. They hire us so that we roam around the universe and we take what we find into darkened rooms, in movie theaters, on TV screens, and we show it to people because they can't do it on a regular basis themselves. They can't find these things. And we say, in effect, well, you're going to go out and make money. We're going to go out and we're going to find everything that's praiseworthy, and we're going to bring it back to you. We will give you a half hour, 1 hour, 2 hours of awesome, praiseworthy universe. An artist is awed by everything. Everything awes us. There's no time to say, I can't identify with what that person wrote, or I could never do that. There is not one moment that goes by that doesn't capture our astonishment and our humor and our horror. We are purveyors of the universe. We entertain, we make them laugh, we make them cry, and we say to them, by our magic, and God knows an actor is a magic, we unite you with the world. Okay. Now, Stanislavski, he started out as an amateur actor. From the time he was little, he came from a very wealthy family, so he was very lucky, because he lived in a big house, and they built a little theater for him. So he used to put on plays from the time he was a little tot. And he grew up and continued his work in the theater as an amateur. And he formed a society called the Society of Arts and Letters. And they put on, I think in a 9-year period, 35 productions 4 of which happened to be Shakespearean. And the work was so nice in them, it was so different from what was going on in theater at the time, that people said that many people who went to work there looked better than the professional actors of the day. He later on became a professional actor and a director, and above all, he became a teacher. What happened was he got very disgruntled with the work he saw around him, because acting at this time, with the exception of those people who really were exceptionally talented, acting was sort of hack. This is how he described it. He said, this is what you see. You see actors coloring words, sad, delivered sadly, love amorously, without regard to context or real meaning. Words like big, small, tall, wide, they carve out of the air with their hands. And then he says, stage movement, it's always theatrical and majestic. He says they don't walk, they advance across the stage. They don't sit, they ensconce themselves. They don't lie down, they recline. And they don't stand, they pose. Then he goes on and he says, agitation is expressed by pacing up and down the stage quickly, by the hands being seen to tremble when they handle the letter, or by letting the glass tremble against the teeth when you're drinking your water. Illness, a hacking cough, shivers, or vertigo. He says, it must be the theater only recognizes consumption, fever, and anemia. He says, death. You clutch your chest, you tear at your shirt collar. The hack actor only recognizes 2 kinds of death, cardiac and asphyxia. So this is what it saw. And what was happening, there was no attention paid to sets. Like they'd have 3, 4 sets. Some of them only had 2 sets in theaters. They'd have an indoor and outdoor. And no matter what the production was, or the time period, they just went down and they hold up the set. And as for costumes, they had nothing to do with the characters. The leading ladies, they wore their own dresses, street dresses. So there was a whole big thing among the leading ladies to try and outdo each other when they performed, just with the way they dressed. Well, in about 1890, I'm going to use this as a blackboard. I want you just to see the spelling of some of these words. There was a fellow named, he was a duke. That's nice. He was a duke, and his name was Saxe Meiningen. Can you see this? Okay. Anyway, he had a group of actors. He got together. Oh, now you can't see. Okay. All right. Where should I put this? Okay. See, you're all logical. That's a good sign. Is that okay? Yeah. Is that good?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. And then I'll sit in front of it.
What about the nearsighted people?
Look, if you can't see, you get up and you go over and you look. That's why.
You listen, right?
That's why, see, I have the light here, because I can't see, because my eyes are blue. Okay, he had this group of actors, and they were directed by a fellow whose name was Kronig. This fellow he directed, and they went on tour, and they went to Russia, and they did the most fantastical thing, because at that time, all the if you were the star, you sort of came down front, you performed for everybody, and if you had a smaller role, you were in the back. Nobody cared about you. They didn't care what the heck you were doing back there. But you were the star, you were out there declaiming and doing those wonderful things that I just read to you. So when this fellow's group came through, the Meiningen players, Stanislavski went to see them. And what they had done was, my God, they had sets that actually were good for the period and for the play. And they had costumes that fitted the characters. And everybody on the bloody stage seemed to know what they were doing. Even the little bitty players. They were like part of an ensemble. The only problem with this group was they were they were still going on typecasting. So this Kronig used to, I mean, if you looked like Hamlet, you got to play Hamlet. Whether or not you could play him, that was beside the point, but you got the role. So they were still doing that with the lead roles. But the sets and the costumes and the ensemble work was very good, and they had never seen this before. And also, he was very impressed with the discipline, because this Kronig, he was like a general. He used to say, the rehearsal begins at such and such a time, and you were there, or if you came late, you just lost your role. They gave you another job to do. And that's how he disciplined the actors. So, Stanislavski looked at this, and he thought, this is just a wonderful thing. And about that time, he met a fellow whose name was Nemirovich. Okay, I'll try and write bigger. I'm sorry. I'm not used to writing. Danchenko. And Danchenko was a critic and very interested in theater. And they thought that the theater was very hopeless, and it was in the hands of dilettantes. So they decided they were going to form a theater where they would take care of all these problems. So they had this meeting, and it lasted, I think, for 18 hours. And they were going to put together a company of professional actors, and they both got lists of actors whom they liked. And this is some of the conversation that they said. Take actor A. We tested each other. Do you consider him talented? To a high degree. Will you take him into the truth? No. Why? Because he has adapted himself to his career, his talent to the demands of the public, his character to the caprices of the manager, and all of himself to theatrical cheapness. A man who has so poisoned himself cannot be cured. Well, what do you say about actress B? She's a good actress, but not for us. Why? She's incredibly given to hokum. Hokum. It's like the hack act. He says, an actress C? She won't do. She does not love art, but herself in the art. Well, what about actor D? Ah, we must pay a great deal of attention to him. Why? He has ideals for which he is fighting. He is not at peace with present conditions. He is a man of ideals. I am of the same opinion. Permit me to enter his name on the list of candidates. So that's how they formed this company. And it came to be called, this was in 1897, the Moscow Art Theater. And they divided up the duties between them. Danchenko was going to manage the theater and direct, and he was going to be the play reader, because he was literary. He was the literary man. And Stanislavski was to direct and to train the actors. This is 1897. What they managed to achieve was authentic sets and lights and costumes that were right for the material they were doing. As a matter of fact, they went to extreme lengths. They did a production of Julius Caesar, and they traveled to Italy, and they brought back museum materials and put it up there. They managed to create an ensemble so that no matter how small your role was in the play, it was of great importance, and you knew what you were doing up there, and what you were doing made logical sense. And you were just as important as a star. Actually, they did away with the star system. They were the first ones who said no eating or drinking in the theater. They were the first ones who put the lights out audience area. People used to sit in the theater with the lights on. And they were the first ones who said, no latecomers admitted. You know, when we go to the theater and they say, we have to wait till the end of the first act, or you have to wait till the break to go in because you came late. So this is what they accomplished. Despite, and it became a highly successful theater. People had never seen it. What happened with the work was, they weren't really training the actors as such, but because of all this rehearsal period they were going through, when you looked up there, you saw human beings for the first time, rather than those actors who clutched their throats when they were dying. Stanislavski was still very discontented. And in 1906, at the age of 42, which I think is very encouraging, the age of 42, he began to think and to experiment with the actor's work. And in 1909, he began to write some of his findings down and to keep a notebook. And in 1911, he established what they called the first studio. I won't go into why it was established, other than to say Danchenko got very jealous of Stanislavski, and he tried to shove him out. And it's very, very ugly if you read the papers from the Moscow archives. Extremely ugly. And Stanislavski hid himself in the teaching and gave up all managerial positions that he had. He used to call politics the filth of the theater. Okay. He started this first studio in 1911, and he continued working and changing this work until 1938, when he died at the age of 75. The thing that really consumed him was, he said, our feelings are not on call. We can't will our feelings just happen. And he believed the feelings and the emotions came out of the subconscious. He called it the soul, but for anyone here who objects to soul, think of it as the subconscious. And he said, there must be a way to consciously trigger the subconscious. And that's what he started to do work on, to experiment on, so that he might find an answer to that. All right. What he discovered, I'm going to go through these very quickly, but then I'll take each one apart. He discovered that an actor trained all his life. He discovered an actor had to have relaxation, had to have concentration. He discovered the use of objectives, or moments, or beats, some people call them, which actually, that came about because he was Russian. He said bits, but they thought he said beats, and that's how that word came. He discovered the use of a through line or a super objective. He discovered that a play should have a concept. The director just didn't do a play to do it. Had to have something to say. He discovered the law of physical actions, of subtext and actors' logic and images. And he discovered the necessity of inner truth and belief. He did what no one else had ever done before, and what no one else has ever done since. And if you remember nothing about him, remember this. He decoded what great acting is. That's what that man did in his work. It was not just for realistic or naturalistic plays. It was not for any particular kind of play. It was a way to one kind of play. And the reason it wasn't is because the central issue of this work is the structure and meaning of what is written. Whatever the writer writes for you, that becomes your guideline. So you're not going to approach a piece of Shakespeare or a piece of Restoration comedy delving into some big psychological thing, particularly in Restoration comedy, when the character's wants and needs are really so minor and so frivolous. Because if you do that, you'll take a comedic character and you turn it into a tragedy. So his way to work was always dictated by the givens of the writer and the play itself. He believed an actor had to be trained internally and externally. Internally, your soul or your subconscious, and externally, your voice and your body. And he said one is not more important than the other. You train them both. What he discovered was really nothing new. If you ever get terribly academic and you read about the Elizabethan theater, the good actors like Keane, the Kabuki theater, the No theater, which are centuries old, you will find that in the writing, when they describe what they were looking at in the good acting, is exactly all the things he talked about. So all good actors did it. All right. The difference was that he wrote down how to do it, as well as writing down his discoveries, how to do that, how to work it. I found, as I was reading to prepare for this, a wonderful quote about film. He said, the cinema, and the cinema was in such an early stage of development at that time. It will bring art and culture to the great masses. He says, it is undoubtedly an important and a beautiful discovery. And he said it would have an influence on acting technique and would, in fact, confirm his findings. He says, you want to see the difference between the art of hack acting and the art of a really good actor? He said, you go to the cinema. The audience is beginning to understand the difference, and they'll soon be demanding it from the actors. And he looked at them and he said, are you ready for that? Relaxation. I won't go into all the cockamamie ways that he experimented with it. I mean, some of them, they're just so absurd, you just sit and you laugh. But what he did was he looked at great actors like Salvini and Eleanor Duse, and what he saw was what they did seemed absolutely effortless. And they were playing these big, massive, emotional roles. And yet there was no sign of strain. You always felt they could go further. There was no fearing for, was the actor going to hurt himself, or was he going to have a heart attack because he was pushing at the emotional life? Everything they did seemed effortless. So he said, what was it about that? How did you achieve that freedom from muscular tension? Now, if you think about it, if you eat a meal and you feel relaxed, you enjoy it better, don't you? You find that? If you're not sitting there with your stomach all in knots, just sitting there eating, you feel better when you're relaxed. Anytime you get relaxed, you take in things. If you get into an argument with someone and you go crazy, and afterwards you say to yourself, God, I can't even remember what happened. But if you're relaxed and you're really present and you're there, you remember everything. You remember every stupid detail of it. And then the person gets mad at you all over again because you remember what happened. He said, we don't wait on stage so that, you know, your whole arm's going like this and you're standing there and you're trying to hide it, right? Or your leg's starting to shake and you're in front of the camera and you're going like this and you're trying to control it. He said you don't wait till it happens in the whole leg or the whole arm. What the actor had to be trained to do was to isolate those areas in his body so that you caught the tension when it began in the little finger rather than waiting till it crawled up the whole arm. And he did this through a technique of teaching the actors to learn the difference between extreme tension and relaxation. I'm not talking about, because I've been in classes where I've seen teachers teach relaxation, and my God, you're ready to go to sleep afterwards. It had nothing to do with working. He was talking about just being free from muscular tension so that you used the minimum amount of energy you needed to do something on a stage. No more, no less. And he taught it through breathing techniques and through this isolation of the muscular structure. The amazing thing was, I mean, we got to figure, I mean, he started this, 1911. He starts work like this. About 15 years ago in this country, when there started to be a whole big thing in the medical profession about relaxation techniques, and my God, it lowered blood pressure. At the Harvard Medical School, do you know what they were teaching? This man's isolation thing. That's what they taught them. Breathing and isolating those muscles. And this is how many years later. I read an article a few weeks ago, and somebody said, I don't care whether an actor can relax. All I want him to do is concentrate. And I just, it made my mind boggle. The two go together just like this. You can't be relaxed unless you're concentrated. And you can't be concentrated unless you're relaxed. It just doesn't work. I sat in a class a couple months ago and I said to a group of actors, and they were all older. One night we started talking about concentration, and I said to them, what were you ever told about concentration? Everyone's, you have to do it. We're always told an actor has to concentrate. And I said, did anybody ever teach you how? And everybody sat and they thought for a while, and then suddenly the whole class began to laugh. And I mean, I had people sitting there who had come through well-known professional training programs. And they said, nobody ever really said how. They just said, you have to do it. He said it was necessary to concentrate so fully in our work, because what happens, everything that we do goes against our concentration. The audience breaks our concentration. Because, what we're required to do, we do with 500 or 600 pairs of eyes watching us. And that's difficult. So he said the audience breaks your concentration. Your lines break your concentration. You don't talk like that. It is very rare that you get a role that you say, oh God, this is really just like me. Most of the time, we have to say things that we don't want to say, and we're not used to expressing them like that. The clothing, many times, that you wear is not what you wear, and so that breaks your concentration. The props are fakes, and you're looking at them, and I don't care how beautifully they're made, they're fakes. And the junk jewelry, which you have to handle as though it's, worth mega bucks, is junk jewelry from the 5 and dime, and you know that. So that breaks your concentration. The scenery, no matter how beautifully designed, breaks your concentration because you look at it and you know it's made out of the canvas or the plastic or whatever they've got up there. And sometimes our personal problems, if we've had a very bad day and we come to work that night, it breaks our concentration. But we are in a field where if we're required to go and film early morning or to go to the theater at 8 o'clock at night, nobody's going to sit around while you take care of your personal problems. You're there to work and they expect you to work. You can't say, I don't feel like it. What he found was there were two forms of concentration. There was outer concentration and there was inner concentration. And it's the actor's choice where his concentration goes. Outer concentration means what you actually hear the other actor or actors saying and what you see on the stage. And what you are trying to do to the other actor. That's outer concentration. Inner concentration is what you decide to think about and nothing else. So that if you decide to think a certain thing, you eliminate everything else. You eliminate it, put it out. So the only thing you're thinking is what you've chosen to do. Or what you see in your mind's eye, what you image. So inner concentration is what you're thinking or what you're seeing. And outer concentration is what you're hearing or what you're doing or what you're seeing the other actor do. And he says the actor chooses between these. For instance, if you're sweeping the floor, you may be carrying on a conversation, but a director says to you, I really want you to get into sweeping the floor. Yeah, the words are coming, but really sweep the floor. That's outer concentration. So the words are going on, but basically your full concentration is on the sweeping, and the words are going. We do that in life anyway. We do these things every day. Okay. Objective. Some people call it endeavor. Some people call it a want. Some people call it an intention. I used to tell students, I don't care what you call it, just so long as you do it. Acting is action, and action is what the character wants. Life is filled with wants. We don't ever open our big mouths and talk without having a need behind it, even if we're just nattering, to pass the time, or we're nattering because we want to get rid of somebody. Our life is filled with talking because we have a want. When you come to choose an objective, you use an active verb. I want to do something to the other person, or I want to do something to that other group of people. Active verbs are very few. If you're familiar with English, when I started to teach, I used to think, something must be wrong because I speak very simply. Something must be wrong with my vocabulary. Because I noticed that I would continually use the same verbs over and over. Of course, there are lots of variations. For instance, you say, you make someone feel guilty. I mean, dear God, you could go on forever with all the guilt games we play. But I used to think I was limited in vocabulary. And then the more I taught, I realized active verbs are very few. To hurt someone is an active verb. To excite someone is an active verb. To frighten them, to tease them, to make them feel guilty. To explain is an active verb. I once heard a teacher say to a student, to explain is not an active verb. And I almost fell out of my chair. I mean, for the love of God, if you're trying to make somebody understand something and they don't, you could explain from now to eternity. That is very active. The actor uses an active verb. And that's what he uses those words for. The actor decides why he wants it. He justifies it to himself. And he decides he wants it now. The character needs it now. It doesn't need it next week. It didn't need it a month ago. The character needs it now. And it is very selfish in terms of it is going to do the character some good. It is going to benefit the character. The conflict of drama is that these wants are continually changing. I was trained when I was a student to score my script. Any of you ever been trained like that? You write down your objectives, you write down your beats. And I was a good student. I mean, if they would have told me to eat garbage, I would have done it. So I did everything I was told. So I scored my script. And it took me years to realize I scored my script, I get up with the other actor, and I am playing what I wrote there. The only thing I'm missing out on is what the other actor's giving back to me. See? What the other actor's giving back. So I'm just doing my own thing, but I'm not playing with anybody. And then it suddenly hit me what massive talking and listening problems this produced. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my God. And I went, because it was like light. I'm not advocating where you get up and you just have no plans at all for what you want to do. But you're working with other human beings and you have to adapt to them. Otherwise you become self-indulgent, what I call caca. And you're changing continually because of the other character's wants and needs. Now, you divide it into big chunks of play. He has a wonderful image he used when he said, it's like chopping, it's like carving a turkey. You carve a turkey, you cut off the wings, you cut off the drumsticks, you cut off the thighs, and you cut the breast. You don't take the leg and chop it into 15 million pieces unless you're making a Chinese dish. You usually leave the leg alone. If you take a play and you divide it up in very large chunks in terms of objectives, your work will be very, very clear, and consequently, it becomes very clear to the audience. So if you can work through and you find one objective for a scene, he says, use it. I remember once having a terrible time with a student. I was trying to teach him about one objective for a scene, and she kept insisting there were 12 in this little bitty, I don't know, it was a 4 or 5 page scene. 12 objectives. And what she had been trained to do was to place something different on every line, which to me is just mishmash. All right. So you say, okay, you have the objective, right? How do you get there? How do you play that? You make your choice about what you want to do in terms of an active verb. How do you do that? Some people call this moments. Some people call it beats or bits. Again, some people call it tensions. I call it moments. Suppose you have a scene written. We'll take a real simple example where the fellow wants to get the young woman to go out with him. That's simple enough. It's written all over the place. So he says, that's my objective. To win her, How do you do that? How does a fella get a girl? He what?
Buys her.
He buys her stuff. Yes, he can bribe her. Absolutely, he can bribe her. Right? All right, that's one choice. What else can he do? He can flatter her. Oh, that's a good one. What else? That's a very active verb.
You can feed her.
Feed her. That's sort of bribing her.
You can beg her.
Beg her. Plead with her. Yes.
Impress.
Impress her. Absolutely. These are all active. You're wonderful. What? Did you say buy her a Porsche? Drive her a Porsche. That's right. You dazzle her. You charm her. All right. Look at all the things you came up with. All of those bloody things are active verbs. Okay? So, you have the little scene, right? Now what happens to us, we fall in all kinds of actors' traps. We look at the bloody scene and we say, oh, I don't know, I can't play that there because it seems to me the line says, I get angry there. So I can't play charming on that line. Listen, so long as you follow the givens of the playwright, you have carte blanche. You can do anything you want to do with those bloody lines. You'd be amazed at what you can learn to do with them. So you come up with all these terrific ideas. So you start out on the first moment that you have and say you try to charm her, right? If it works, and the actress whom you're working with is very taken by this, you're scoring, aren't you? And you continue, even though you made all these other wonderful choices. You say, boy, I'm scoring big, and you continue with the charming. Now, if she looks at you like, God, you're such an asshole. Unless you're playing a loony, and occasionally we get to play those wonderful crazy roles. Unless you're playing someone who's crazy, you do not continue trying to charm her. See, only a loony would do that. So you say, I'll have to try flattering. And you start going on with that. Right. Again, if it works, you continue. And you see how it's always dictated by the other actor or the other actress or a group of actors on the stage. They become, it's a wonderful thing, you're not so lonely up there. Because they become your governor. You know when you're doing enough, and you know when you're not doing enough from the reaction that comes back. If you can open yourself to that, if you can be relaxed enough to take in what the other person is giving you. All right. So you go through all those things. I won't go through all of them. You get the idea of what I'm talking about. You go through all those things. Now, in the end, indeed, you may win the girl. You may win her. But you may also not. Depends on what the playwright wrote. But it makes no difference whether you win or lose. The only thing that is important is that you fought for what you wanted. And that's what produces a conflict in the drama. Okay. Makes no difference if you lose. It's like watching the prize fighter. You see two people get up to fight, and if they both aren't trying to win, it's not very exciting. You know it's a bust before it begins. And it's the same thing in our work. All right. So we have objectives, and we have the moments, and we have that beginning base without which he says you don't do anything, the relaxation and the concentration. Then we get to what he called a through line, or a super objective, or some people call it a spine. I call it a super objective. Again, you're dealing with choice. All these things involve choice from the actor. I always used to tell my students, you choose what to play and you play what you choose. Please remember that, I would tell them. Because you'll never look like you can't work. It may not be what they want. You don't know what they want. But your work's always going to look interesting. And you're going to look like you know what acting is. If you can learn to do that. All right. The character has the objectives, and we know it has a moment. And I will do one of my gorgeous drawings for you in a bit to put it all together so you see it just like on a little chart. Every character in a written work has a main want or need, and that is their super objective, or their spine, or their through line. If you take, let's use an example of Blanche in Streetcar, all right? I'm not saying this is the only through line, because there can be as many through lines as there are directors, if they have the sense to see it, or as there are actors, providing you don't go against the givens of the writer. But let's say that Blanche's through line, or spine, or super objective in Streetcar is to get protection. That is her main want and need, all through that play, to get protection. Every scene that Blanche is in works toward getting that protection. And as we all know, she never gets it. But every scene in that play would go through that. So you see, what he had done was he established a theme for an actor to use. All this work is just to keep our bloody heads busy on a stage. Because otherwise we get scared. It's to keep our heads busy on a stage or in front of a camera, that you aren't saying, oh my God, look at the thing that's there, that machine. It's all to keep your heads busy and to keep them in a very logical, coherent path. I was going to say something, but it'll come to me, I'm sorry. Okay, so you're going with every scene towards this main want of the character. And that main want feeds into, he believed, the concept for the written work. What the director wants to say with this written work. You can take a play like Hamlet, and none of these, I'm going to throw out some really wacko concepts, none of these actually, if you look in the text, go against the text. You could play Hamlet as a bumbling fool who, because of his philosophical training, cannot make up his mind about anything. He just is undecided. You could play him, as has been done, Olivier did it, as a man who was very in love with his mother and who was jealous over her getting married to his uncle. A director could say, my concept is that he loved his father so much he is hell-bent on revenge. Peter Brook did a production and he cast the most enormous, fat, grotesque person he could find to play Hamlet. Because he thought Hamlet, the way he was going to do it, was a bozo. So he went out and got this grotesque actor. It will all work. The givens will support all of those concepts. And each one of those concepts, the characters would have different super objectives, and they would have different objectives and different moments. Let me do you this. because I can't draw at all. But here's what it's like. You don't start to laugh even at the end of the day. All right. I'm just going to do, you have one character, right? You got one character, and let's say this character's in a 2-act play. And this character has 2 scenes. He's going up like this. And he's got 2 biggie scenes in the first act. So he's been real lucky. He finds objectives. And that's the end of Act 1 here. So he has 2 scenes. He has an objective for each scene. And in between, he has how he's going to get there. He hopes he will. Anyway, you got moments. A moment can be, it can last a couple lines. It can last a half a page. It can last a page and a half. It all depends on what's going on with the other actors. So we'll say he had just 4 moments over here, and he has, I don't know, we'll give him a little. He has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's got 6 moments leading up, and it comes the end of the first act. So he gets into the second act, and he's got 3 lovely scenes. This big role. And he has little moments. You just pretend they're whole messages. I told you, I can't draw. It's horrible. But he's got these objectives. And then he's working towards his super objective, his main want. That's there. We put a little star there. And then that feeds into the director's concept. And that's only one character. But all the characters are doing the same thing. It's always amazed me that directors, they'll say to an actor, you have to want something. You ever have a director say you have to want something? So, you're a good actor. So you say, okay, I want blah, blah. But there's no discussion with the other actors about what their blah, blahs are. So everybody's on this big stage, or they're in front of the camera, and everyone has their own blah, blahs. But nothing fits together. It doesn't make any sense a lot of times. So that's a little disturbing. Okay. All right. Now, the law of physical actions. Did you ever hear anybody say you have to be the character? Did you ever hear that term? Be the character? And they usually attribute it to this poor man, Stanislavski. He never said any such thing. As a matter of fact, he was so adamant against that kind of nonsense, he said that's pathological. That's a word he used. Pathological. He said you cannot be anyone else because you cannot exchange your soul for anyone else's. And when you feel like you have exchanged your soul for someone else's, you've gone nuts. You're no longer an actor. Oh, you can be nuts. He says you can only use yourself and be yourself. And we get really frightened of that. Because we feel like what we are isn't good enough. Or that people are going to get bored with it. And he said the most beautiful thing about it. He said, think of how many primary colors there are. How many are there? 3. And then think of the infinite amount of colors that come from those 3 primaries. And how many notes are there on a musical scale? 8. And think of the infinite amount of variety that comes from 8 notes on a musical scale. And he said, you mean to tell me that as human beings, where every hair on our heads is different, one from said at the beginning about how he was looking for a way to consciously trigger that subconscious or your soul or your emotions and your feelings. Because he said, if you live the character, the feelings will happen. I'll explain that in a moment. Then he said something else interesting. He said, don't worry about feelings. We are trained so often by people who keep saying, what are you feeling? What are you feeling? What are you feeling? He said, don't worry about the feelings. In life, you don't will feelings. They just happen. You don't say to yourself, I think I just heard something funny. I think I'll laugh. You don't say to yourself, I think I feel badly. I think I'll cry. We're not made up like that. You hear something funny and you laugh. You respond to it. You feel badly. You're not willing that lump in your throat. Suddenly there's a lump in your throat and you're going to cry. You get angry. You're not willing it. It happens because something made it happen. And yet, do you realize that we do that in our work all the time? We try to will those things to happen. Oh God, here it says, halfway into this lovely piece, I have to cry. And then we try and will it. Or I have to laugh. And then it comes across and it's very phony. He says, if you find out what the character does in terms of these active verbs, and you do that, you will live him. What do I want and how do I get it? And it will result in a very logical, cohesive kind of life for the character. Very logical and cohesive. The writer gives us really a blueprint or a skeleton. Now I know there are people who think that the writer is the be-all and end-all of our work, and they look on us as being interpreters. But we are creators, and to create means to make from nothing. The writer is not our work. He is not the theater or the movies or the television. I know sometimes they try to make us feel like that, but he isn't those. We are. It doesn't even become a movie or a TV thing or a theater until we do our work on it. The writer gives you like a blueprint or a skeleton. And you know from what I've said previously, I am a very strong believer in not going against what the writer has written. But basically, he says this character does this, and this character says this. And the actor says, yeah, but I know why. I know why he says that. And I know why he does that. And that's really what our work is. We supply the why. Okay. If the wants, the objectives, and the physical business are correct for the character, the feelings will result. You can't play love. You can't play love, but you can recreate all the stages by which a person falls in love. And by recreating all those stages, it's almost acting, I call it a decoy duck. You create those stages of all the things you do when you love someone. And it's like a decoy duck, because those very actions lure the emotions out. And you didn't will them, they just happen. very simple. Well, this is good. I understand this. I got the active verbs. I got the moments. I got the super objective. I have the through line. I have all these things, and now I don't have to worry about the feelings. I just do what the character does, which I'm planning on doing because I'm a good actor, and I'm going to have this terrific thing happen. The difficulty is that you need such a firm discipline to even keep your mind on what you're doing fully. And that's the reason for the concentration work. So that when you choose to do these things, you play them fully. And when you choose to think certain things, you think it fully. So many times actors, you say to them, what were you trying to do there? And they tell you, and you say, my God, that was wonderful. Why didn't you do that? And the actor looks at you like, what, are you crazy? Of course I was doing that. But they're doing it not 100%. And because of that, the work has become very muddy. And you really can't tell what they're doing. Because you need the discipline to do that. And you need control over your concentration. And the other thing that makes it difficult is you need to have a very complex understanding of yourself and of other human beings. I get so livid when I hear people say that actors are childish and stupid. It just makes me livid. We may be childlike, and we may be vulnerable, and we may be naive, but we are not stupid. No one in this field could understand and do this work and be stupid. What it requires, again, is that you don't limit yourself when you're looking at people. We are in a very humanistic field. We deal with human behavior. We deal with human beings all the time. And you can't limit yourself. You know, we go through life and we make judgments on people. We see that person and we think they're a bitch, and we see him and he's a geek. And the actor, it isn't that you're going to become a saint, but you learn to look, to understand what you're looking at. And in that way, you grow not only as an artist, but you grow as a human being also. All right. The law of physical action. Okay. We dealt with the thing about not worrying about feelings and living the character. All right. How do you do this? Through a thing called subtext. Now, for years, every time you pick up one of those acting texts, those how-to books, it says something like subtext, the underlying meaning under the words. And I read it and I think, the underlying meaning under the words. And I heard some people describe it as, well, you know, it's when you say, I love you, but you're really saying underneath, I hate you. In living the character, you get inside someone else's head, is what happens. You can't begin to try to place some esoteric idea of the underlying meaning of the lines. You ever been to a party and you look across a room and you see somebody and you say, God, I'd love to get in that person's head just for 5 minutes. Ever done that? Just to see what really makes them tick. That's what an actor does. An actor thinks like that character does, because that character's thinking makes him say and do what is written. take a character like Blanche again, Blanche doesn't realize she says some horrible things to Stanley. She has no knowledge of that. You know, you sit out there as an audience member and you think, oh my God, why doesn't she just shut up? Why is she saying that to him? You know, he'll ruin her. Part of the reason she's saying it is because of the kind of illness that she has. And when you read it as the actor, there's a duality there, because you know the character doesn't know that she might be making these mistakes. But as the actor, when you're analyzing her, you know what she's doing. And so you have to be very clever about the thinking, because her thinking is to justify everything she does, because it makes good sense to her. I used to tell students, subtext is a physical action. Subtext must be very active. I used to tell them, if you feed in diddle in your thinking, you will get diddle in return. It takes a long while to find the thinking for a character, and I think it happens very gradually in rehearsal process. And that can either be when you're at rehearsals, or it can be home when you're doing your homework. It doesn't have to take place with anyone helping you to do it. Actors' logic. The actor works with the writer's given circumstance. The given circumstances the writer gives him, and he works towards a given end. At the beginning of tonight, I told you that one of the main tenets of all of Stanislavski's work was the structure and the meaning of the play. You had to follow the structure and the meaning of the play. What happens is the actor, through actors' logic, some actors, I think they're born with it. They have the most incredible sense of actors' logic. And it has nothing to do with being logical in everyday life. It's a kind of minute type of logic where you get a whole series of terrifically, logically connected actions. And you look at it and it makes such sense that you think, it couldn't possibly be any other way than how they're doing it. Most of us are not born with that. Most of us have to learn it, actors' logic. But the more I teach, the more I realize that the logic and the coherence of what is there is of prime importance to our work. I'll give you a little example of this, because it's a really nice one. Anybody here know Gogol's Dead Souls? You know? Then you bear with me while I share the story. What is written is a play about feudal Russia. And it's a play about when the landlord owned the serfs. And the government kept a register of all the serfs. And the government was lazy. So sometimes the little serfs would die. And the government wouldn't bother coming around to take them off the register. So they'd say to the landowners, you still own them. You still have to pay tax on them to us. Right? And then when they get off their lazy butts, they'd go around and they'd strike them off the register. And then the landlords no longer paid taxes on them. So the landlords were kind of in a bind because they had a lot of people dying because people were so lazy, and they were stuck still paying the taxes. And this fellow named Chichikov decides that he will buy up the dead souls, and then he's going to take just the names to the government, and he's going to get a loan from them for these people who no longer exist. So he has a real good scam there. So that's basically what the play's about in a nutshell. that it lays out all the feudal sores of Russia. Okay, what is written in this particular scene, I swear to God, it's this cut and dry. There's a scene that is basically, it's like a business interview concerning a sale. There's this fellow named Pushkin, and he's sitting in his room, and a rap comes to his door, and Chichikov appears, and at first he looks at Pushkin, and Pushkin has his long, straggly hair, and he thinks he's a housekeeper. And then he finds out he isn't, and he comes in, and Chichikov tells Pushkin of his offer. He wants to buy up the dead souls. And Pushkin says, "This sounds pretty good to me," and he orders up the samovar to give him some tea and a little bit of cake, and they find a little piece of clean paper, and they draw up the deal, and then Chichikov exits. And then Pushkin's left in the room, and he wanders over, and he picks up a watch. He has a room full of junk. He's a terrific miser, one of the best misers that's ever been written. Picks up a watch, and he looks it over, and he looks out the window, and he says, "I'll give it to him when I die." That's what's written. And they were having problems with this scene, and I think it's one of the best examples of logic, coherent logic. And these are the suggestions that Stanislavski made to them. He said, Pushkin is this horrible miser. Horrible miser. I mean, he goes out every morning at the crack of dawn, and he collects everything he can, and he brings it home, because these are his treasures. And he gets out in the streets before anyone else goes out there. So basically, I mean, he's living in a place like, remember Fred Sanford's junkyard? Remember that house? He's living like that. So he's out in the street, Stanislavski says, that morning, and you're collecting your junk. It's a sole of a shoe, a little rusty nail. You're putting it into your little poke. And all of a sudden, what occurs to him? He's left his house. And someone may be back there robbing his treasures. So he races home, and he goes in, and the first thing he does is he checks around to make sure his junk is all there. And then he sits down, and he begins lovingly examining these treasures. There comes a rap at the door. Well, I mean, my God, he just ran home thinking someone was robbing him. So what do you think he thinks when the rap comes at the door?
Robin.
Somebody came to rob him. Chichikov walks in, he sees this guy with the long straggly hair, and all of a sudden, this guy is tearing around the room like a madman, trying to protect this junk that he has, because he thinks someone's coming to rob him. And Chichikov has to say, no, 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 you know, this is what I came for. So there becomes a whole lot of conflict there. And this isn't a question of a director giving some actor a lousy bunch of business. This is all logical sense. So Pushkin actually tries to get out of the room, and Chichikov finally has to convince him to stay there. And he finally gets a conversation going with him, and he explains about he's going to do a really good deed for him. He's going to buy up his dead souls, and then he won't have to pay taxes on them, and this is going to be beneficial to him. And Pushkin is so impressed. He thinks he has a benefactor here. And Stanislavski says to him, I know you're playing a miser. And he says, you're bringing out this samovar. He said, the tea has been sitting in the top of it for days. And this cake probably has been sitting there for 5 months. You got it from a relative 5 months ago, and it's stale. But the way you offer it, it's like it's the finest thing in your house. He said, that's what the miser has to do. And of course, Chichikov says, no, thank you. And then they go to look for a clean piece of paper. And can you imagine in this room, there just isn't one with all this junk. And Stanislavski said to him, it's so simple, just look. Because what's going through your head, God, if I can't find the paper and we can't complete the deal, then the whole thing's down the tubes. And I'm still stuck with these people I have to pay the taxes on. That's all you need to do. You don't have to play frantic, right? search the junk and have the thoughts. So they find the paper, they complete the deal, and Chichikov leaves, and suddenly Pushkin thinks, my God, if any more of them die on me, I wonder if he'll come back. Maybe I should have given him a present. And he runs around the room trying to select just the right thing that he can present him with, and he finally decides on the watch. And he goes over to the window and he looks down to see if he's there or is getting into his carriage, and he begins to clean the watch. And as he cleans it, what does he think? This is very nice. What the hell am I giving this away for? Some more. I'll give it to him when I'm dead, that he may remember me by. And the scene ends. What does he do? He has his treasure. This newfound treasure of the watch. He looks for the perfect hiding place. Because of course, now that it's a treasure, someone would come in and take it. And that's how the scene ends. And that's how he filled it out with the actor's fortune. Images. I'm doing a canto. I'm watching. Look at this was this whole man's, all his life's work. It's hard to get it. It's almost what is imaged becomes. What is imaged becomes. And again, the actor uses himself to create these images of what he talks about. And he uses his imagination. All of this work is a combination of self and imagination. I'll give you a quick example. There's a play called A Moon for the Misbegotten, written by Eugene O'Neill. And it's basically about O'Neill's brother, who was an actor and had a really bad drinking problem and a bad whoring problem. And he has a very long monologue. It's a tremendously long monologue at the end of the play, when he goes to this other character, Josie, and he makes this tremendous confession because he feels so guilty because he had taken his mother out. They'd always had bad relations. And he took his mother to California. And for the first time, everything seemed great. He had stopped boozing, and she was happy because they were a pretty miserable family. And then suddenly, I think what she got was a brain tumor. And anyway, she ended up dying. And he had to bring her body back east for burial. And when they were taking the coffin, was in the front of the car, the railroad car. And he's wandering through the car, boozed out of his head, and he picks up some old horn. Right? And so he just lives with this memory about his mother's body being in the car and how guilty he is. And he makes this big confession to this lovely woman, and at the end she tells him that his mother forgives him, and he breaks down. So I had an actor working on this, and he had done really good work, really good, solid work. But he was very upset because he said, I can't break down at the end. I just can't get to that point. So I said, well, let's start taking a look at it, and we'll see, what's going on here. So sometimes when I work in class, I'll throw questions out to the actor, and the actor doesn't look at me. He tries to keep his concentration, but he answers them. So I said to him, we started going through the speech, and I'll just give you a couple little examples. He says that he was standing at the foot died. So I started feeding out these questions about what condition were you in? And he starts telling me, you know, he's sober. So I started pushing him a little bit. And finally what came out was he was drunk. And he was standing there. And then I started questioning him about what was going on with the mother. And he was telling me that she looked at him with great love, pushed him a little bit more, and what came out, she saw he was drunk. And she turned her head in disgust and closed her eyes and died. And then we started about the coffin, what kind of coffin we chose. And he's describing some big fancy thing, and lots of money, and I push him a little bit, and what came out, he says, no, he bought a cheapo because he used the money to drink. So we went through like that, and you see what the actor was building up was a series of highly selfish, piggish images and subtext. And what he had been doing before was he had painted himself out to be a really nice guy. And what happened was that when he got to the end, he had no problem breaking down because, I mean, he realized what a total pig he was. And that's the reason he felt such guilt. And that was the reason why he felt so sad. And he realized that probably she was the only person who would ever really love him, and he had betrayed them. So anyway, that's my example for images. Okay. The necessity of inner truth and belief. All of this work we've been talking about has one goal. One goal. And that is that we believe what we are doing. That's the reason we do all our work. All this kind of work. So we can believe in what we do. It's not a very poetic way of putting it. But really and truly, you know all acting is, aside from all those wonderful things I spoke about earlier in the evening, it's when we open our big mouths and no matter what we have to say, we sound like we've had that experience, whether or not we've had it. We sound like we understand what we're talking about. That's all acting is. And you know from watching good acting and from watching lousy acting, some actors open their mouths and they talk about things and you believe them. And you get sort of carried away with what they're doing. And other actors open their mouths and they might be very proficient at what they're doing. But you kind of sit there and sometimes your head is going off with, I wonder how they did that. Or I wonder what they worked on for that. Or they just might be plain ordinary bad. And you know in your heart of hearts, that actor doesn't know. They don't know what that moment's like that they're talking about. That's why we do all this work, so we can believe. Because if we believe, the audience believes. The magic if. I was taught as a student the magic if, Stanislavski's magic if. And we were told all you had to do was to say to yourself, if I were this person in these circumstances, then I would blah, 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 blah. That doesn't do anything. I've been teaching 22 years, and I have had, I think, some very, very fine students. That doesn't turn on an actor's imagination. Now, the diligent actors can sit there and say, if I was this, if I was that, and you're going to go along. But you're looking for stuff to stir your imagination, so you want to do these things, so you believe in it. Specific incidents to fill out the character's life, the life that's written. That's another thing. I was trained as a student. They used to give us big, long lists of questions. Answer these questions. What was the politics of the character? What were their religion? What about their mother's life history? What about the father's life history? I used to do all this. Except I didn't play little blind. But it doesn't make any difference about the character's religion or political beliefs unless that's a big part of the play. There's no point on an actor spending his time imagining the problems the character had with his mother unless the play is about a character who's got a bad problem with the mother. Then you fill it out. I know characters were born, and I know they had parents. But I think it's far more important for the actor to fill out the specific givens that the playwright has given him to the point where he can believe what is written. Then if he wants to decide about his political beliefs and his religious beliefs and his mother and father, to me that's icing on the cake. So that's my understanding of what the magic if is. The filling out of specific incidents until you know, and this is why I said at the beginning of the evening, it's not any teacher, it's you yourselves. Until you know, you not only believe it here, you believe it in here. And you can, if something happens inside to you when you got it in here, and you believe it that kind of truthfulness. We confuse truthfulness so many times in this country with actors doing nothing. They get on a stage, they get in front of the camera, and they do nothing because they're being truthful. We see no conflict. We see no drama. We just see a performance of someone playing sincere. And it's not very exciting to watch. From what you've heard this evening, you can see that everything that his work involved was bringing the actor towards being active, towards action. All of it was involved with that. None of it was involved with sitting there and mulling over, playing it being sincere and being nice. It involves conflict and drama and active things to involve the actor so that he isn't afraid of the camera. He isn't afraid of the audience. When this man was very close to dying, he said, God bless you.
Thank you.
He said, God bless you. He said, there's only one thing I am absolutely certain of in this field. Now, I mean, you've been sitting here for a good long while with me. So you know we found a lot of things, and I'm sure you've heard about those things. He said, there's only one thing I'm absolutely certain of. You cannot go against the nature of man. You cannot go against the nature of man. And what he meant was, as human beings, we respond in a certain way. We're made up like that, unless we become pathological and we develop really bad psychological problems. We're made up to respond a certain way. This is what he meant by being truthful. And he says for each character, you have to find that human response. You don't do that other thing where you pretend you're playing at emotions. Because you'll go against how a human being reacts. And then what will happen is your soul, or your emotional system, or your subconscious will rebel because you're lying to it. And that's what you meant by being true. that he wanted to write about things that were common to all actors who wanted to be artists. All these things are the very base of all of our work. He did not intend for it to be a formula. And he cautioned repeatedly that on top of this base, people should change and grow. If I put every student I have had in 22 years of teaching in one room, and I trained them all the same way. I put them in one room, and I went around and asked each person, say, how do you work in a role? How do you work in a role? There would be so many variations because you adapt it to yourself. That's why you don't get it from a teacher. You teach yourself. They would all be different. And I know this because I've sat in classes where if somebody was having a problem with something and another student was coming along, I'd say, well, maybe if you could tell us a little bit, how'd you approach it? And they'll say something, and another student says, oh, and I didn't approach it like that, I did this. You rely on yourself. Is what people refer to as the method the same? Remember we said earlier, I said earlier, an actor has two sides. He believed an actor had two sides, external, the voice in the body, and internal, the subconscious or the soul. And that it was necessary to train both sides of the actor. One was not more important than the other. I'll just quick go through because I think this is important for actors to understand. And it's all written. God, we have to learn to read. This is our theater history. It is the history of acting. This man influenced every drop of teaching, every director, everything that is our field. In 1909, remember he put down some of his discoveries. In 1911, he started that first studio, and he had two people in it. He had a fellow named Michael Chekhov, who was not to be confused with Anton. I think Anton may have been a cousin or uncle, but Michael Chekhov was an actor. So he had Chekhov in there, and he had a fellow named Boleslavsky. Those were in the first studio. All right, and that's in 1911. Remember I told you he went on with this work until 1938, when he died at the age of 75. So these two fellows, they're in the first studio. In 1922, Boleslavsky defected to the States. In 1923, the Moscow Art Theater came over here, and they performed for the first time in the United States, and it was the first time anyone had seen any of the Russian work, except for some little lady whose name was Nazimova. And her big claim to fame was, they said she's about 4 feet, but when she got on a stage, she could be any height she wanted to be. I don't know, but anyway, that was her big claim to fame. But all she had ever played with the Moscow Art Theater were bit roles. But that was all the Russian work they had ever seen until 1923, when the company was brought on tour. In 1927, Michael Chekhov had been through Berlin, Vienna, and Paris. And in 1935, he came to Hollywood. This is where he came. Only 2 people had been directly trained by Stanislavski in the first studio, Chekhov and Boleslavsky. And in 1924, until 1929, Boleslavsky, he wrote, did you ever see those 6 lessons of acting? It's a little skinny book. It's the first acting book I ever was given. He wrote that. Anyway, in 1924, Boleslavsky, a lady called Maria Uspenskaya, whom you can still see on late night movies, she plays Frankenstein's mother. The old Frankenstein. And he and Uspinskaya and a fellow named Bulgakov, who was a playwright as well as an actor, went into New York and they started the American Laboratory Theater in New York. And they took with them the knowledge from the first studio when they began this lab. And among the students in the American Laboratory Theater was Lee Strasberg. And the Russians, when they had come on tour in 23, had created such a big stir with their work. No one had ever seen work like this before. Because, you know, when you look up there and it looks human and you believe it. Well, American actors decided they wanted to do that also. And in 1931, Lee Strasberg and Harold Clurman and Stella Adler and Ilya Kazan and Sandy Meisner and Robert Lewis, and my God, I could go on forever, formed a group called the Group Theater. And it was a very exciting time in this country because it was the first time in our country when there was a possibility of there being a national theater. And the other thing that they were dedicated and intended on doing was this Stanislavski's work. As with any group that you put together, there were problems. You can read about them. There's lots written, and it's dependent on who wrote it, what they say. So it's interesting to read them all. Basically, what they were doing in their training was what Chekhov and Boleslavsky had got in the first studio. But if you bear in mind, Stanislavski's work continued to change and grow, continually, all those years. But these people were doing what had been taught in the first studio. So there was a lot of dissension in the company. Who didn't agree with how they were being trained, and they had some problems. Some of the actors began to have psychological problems. There was a lot of, for some of them, too much digging, psychological digging at themselves. Stella Adler got angry, and she went to Paris, where Stanislavski was vacationing. He was very old. He was in his 70s. She went to Paris, and she said to him, you know, I always loved acting, and now I hate it because of your system. And he took, she was in some play with group theater. I think it was called The Gentlewoman. I don't know. It doesn't make any difference. But he took this little 10-minute scene, and every day she went to his studio, and he worked with her on this 10-minute scene for like something like 5 weeks. And when she went back, she told the group, he is no longer doing emotional recall work. His work has changed. He has gone on to the givens of the writer that he feels are very important for the actor to work with those. He has gone on to subtext. He has gone on to images, the physical action stuff. She told them all this. Well, they were having problems because it's hard to get a group of actors together. You know, we all have terrible egos. And finally, the group split. Some people say they split, that it split up because of what she told them, but there were people in the group who didn't agree with that. Who knows what happened? Because like I said, if you read it all, everybody has a different version. But anyway, they split up. And all these people went out and they did whatever they understood of his work. And they put their own stamp on it. And that's how the American method came about. And what you hear referred to as the method. All right? The other problem that happened, these are the last 3 lines. The other problem that happened was that Stanislavski had notebooks that he'd been carrying around for And when it was published over here, he hated it. He said it has nothing to do with my life in art. He said it's a bunch of anecdotes. And if you ever get a chance to read the European versions, the later version that he wrote, it's a totally different book. I was fortunate enough I read it when I was working in Canada. But he wanted to put down his work. And Elizabeth Reynolds Hapgood, and her husband was an editor. And they went to Russia, and they told him they would like to publish his work. And they told him they would help with the editing. He had copious notebooks. They would help with the editing. And he signed over the rights to any English translation that would ever be done. The fact that the translation, she knew Russian, had to come through that. He just signed it all away. And that's the reason why today there's so many things in Russian that, despite the fact they've been translated over there, they're not available to us. Because they won't give them to us. Because what happened was, they were very good people, but they were not theater people. And they edited, and they took out whatever they felt the North American people wouldn't understand. And they changed titles. The title of the book is not the title of the book. The chapters are out of order. Yale Press thought it was too long, so she got in touch with Stanislavski. Can I cut it some more? And she cut it some more. So what we've got is a mishmash. They put the book out in 1936, the first book, An Actor Prepares. This was 2 years before he died. It was published here, and that book dealt with, if you read it, if you've managed to get through it, I despise the book. I always want to slap the teacher in the face. Everything is so smug. They printed it in 36. It dealt with the inner working of the actor, all the subconscious. Then Stanislavski died in 38. In 1949, 13 years later, posthumously, we got Building a Character. And that's the book that had all the voice and speech work in it. And I mean, it is mind-boggling what he felt an actor should be put through when you read it. But by that time, everybody in this country thought Stanislavski's work was nothing but feelings and emotions and the inner work of the actor, and he didn't give a damn about an actor's voice and body. Because it comes out 13 years later, again, badly translated and chopped up. 12 years later, after that, they put out the third book called Creating a Role. And this was the book, again posthumously put out there, that put the first two books together. The voice in the body and the inner. And again, it is badly translated. And there is a problem. But anyway, that's how that came about. And I think that's all I have to say. If you want to take a break, and if you want to come back for a question and answer period, I'm willing to do that. And the other thing I wanted to say to you, was everyone given a flyer when they came in? Did anyone not get a flyer? Okay. We have some up here. On the flyer, it tells you when I'm going to start classes. And I'm going to be interviewing for classes tomorrow afternoon and Wednesday evening. So if you're interested, you'll find the information on there to phone up to make an appointment. Or take a pee-pee break. Thank you very much.